paint was still tacky in places where the sun hadn't quite reached it, and if a man touched the last letter of the sign too eagerly, he came away with gold on his thumb. She had commissioned it herself, from a traveling sign painter who charged her $2 and a bowl of stew, and she had stood in the September dust watching him letter each stroke, as if she did not trust the word to hold still until it dried. The Marshal came in on a Tuesday, same as always, ducking his hat brim under the low frame of the door the way he had ducked it a year before, when the room had smelled of spilled whiskey and something meaner than that. He set himself down on the same stool. The counter beneath his elbows had been sanded and oiled since then, but it was the same wood, the same grain, the same knot near the far end that had once held a chipped shot glass steady. He did not remark on the sign. He never did. He only looked up at where the old cast-iron pot now hung behind the counter, polished black and catching the lamplight like something that had earned its rest, and something moved behind his scarred face that was not quite a smile. "Enough for two?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked 11 months and some days before, the first time he had ever sat at that counter, when the room had belonged to another man's name and her own had been spoken only to be spat after. Back then, the question had been an accident of hunger, a Marshal too tired from the trail to phrase it any other way. Now it was something closer to a ritual, though neither of them would have called it that. She wiped her hands on her apron before she answered, because some habits outlast the reasons for them. "There's always enough now," she said. That single sentence carried more than either of them let it show. A year ago, there had not been enough. Not of food, not of patience, not of belief that a woman built the way she was built, widowed, past what men called her prime, could be worth more than the labor she was underpaid to give. A year ago, the room had rung with a different kind of talk, and the pot now gleaming behind her had once been called, in front of a full house, slop fit for hogs. To understand how a woman once treated as a burden to be tolerated came to own the very room that had shamed her, the counter, the stools, the black pot swinging steady on its hook. It is necessary to go back to the cold that had settled over the cattle town the autumn before, when the wind came down off the plains like it meant to scour the paint from every building in sight, and a Marshal riding the rail spur for reasons of his own first smelled barley and beef through a saloon door, left ajar against the frost. Dawn came to Hardwick Crossing the way it came every October morning that year, reluctant, gray, smelling of coal smoke and frost-killed grass, and by the time the sky had gone from black to the color of dishwater, she was already awake. She had not slept past 4 in longer than she could remember. The habit had come with widowhood, or maybe before it, back when there had been a husband to feed and a house to keep warm on a cook's wages, stretched thin as tallow. Now there was only the saloon's back kitchen, a room with one window glazed thick with grease and years, and the great cast-iron pot that had belonged to her mother before it belonged to her, black and heavy, and scarred along one lip where it had been dropped decades ago on a floor 2 states away. She built the fire first. That was the order of things. Fire, then water, then the meat that had been salted the night before, then the barley soaked since dusk and swollen now to twice its size. Her hands moved without her watching them, the way a person's hands do a thing they have done 10,000 mornings running. She fed kindling into the stove's belly, coaxed the flame with a breath she'd learned not to waste, and set the pot on its hook above the heat before the windows had lightened enough to show her own reflection in the glass. The wind outside had teeth in it. It found the gaps in the saloon's back wall and worried at them all night, and by morning, the woodpile stacked against the kitchen door wore a rime of frost that would not burn off until noon. She wrapped a shawl twice around her shoulders and did not complain of the cold, because there was no one awake yet to complain to, and because complaint had never put a meal on a table. The beef went in first, browned in its own fat, then the barley, then water enough to cover it by 2 knuckles width, a measure she had learned from a woman long dead, in a kitchen long gone, in a life that existed now only in the seasoning she carried forward, without needing to think about where it came from. Onion, a little vinegar to cut the fat. Salt, always more than seemed wise, because men who worked cattle all day did not want a shy pot. By the time the barkeep unlocked the front door and the first cold light came slanting through it across the sawdust floor, The smell had already climbed the stairs, drifted under the doors of the rooms where drovers slept off the night before, and reached the street outside, where a stranger on a tired gray horse had just reined up at the hitching post, in no particular hurry, reading the weathered sign above the door, like a man reading a warrant. The stranger did not move to dismount yet. He sat with the reins loose in one scarred hand, and the horse blew steam into the cold, and neither of them seemed inclined toward hurry. Inside, she did not know he was there. She knew only the pot and the fire under it, and the 41 men she would feed before noon if the railman came through as the foreman had promised, at 4 cents a bowl, of which she kept perhaps half after the owner took his cut for the flour and the wood and the privilege, as he called it, of using his stove. She had done the sum more than once, late at night. By the light of a single tallow candle she rationed like medicine. 4 cents a bowl, 40 bowls a day on a good day, 20 on a slow one, and from that her wage, and from her wage the debt she still owed the dry goods man for the winter coat she had bought the year her husband died, because a widow could not bury a man and go without a coat besides, whatever the town thought of the price. She had paid it down to $9 now. $9 felt, some nights, larger than the sky. Her dress, the gray one, the only one fit for standing at a stove 12 hours, had been mended so many times at the elbow that the patch had its own patches, small islands of cloth from a flour sack, from a shirt too far gone to save, stitched in thread that did not quite match but held. She wore it because there was no other, and because a woman learned early on the trail, and in the kitchens after it, that dignity was not a matter of what covered you, but of how you stood in it. The ache in her hands came first each morning, before the ache in her back, before the smaller, quieter ache that had nothing to do with labor at all, and everything to do with an empty side of a bed she had stopped reaching across 2 winters ago. She did not speak of that ache. She stirred the pot instead, and the stirring was its own kind of answer. From the doorway behind her, the owner watched, arms crossed, chewing the inside of his cheek in a way that meant arithmetic he did not like. He was thinking, as he had thought every morning for 11 months, of the $340 he owed men upriver who did not forgive debts the way churches did, and of how much easier it would be to explain a shortfall in the till if the fault could be laid at the feet of a woman already blamed by half the town for eating more than she cooked. He said nothing yet. He only watched the stew steam, and did the sum again, and found it still did not favor him. Outside, the stranger swung down from the gray horse at last, and looped the reins, and stood a moment reading the sign above the door, as if it owed him something. The owner did not wait for arithmetic to resolve itself in his favor. He straightened his collar, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and walked out of the kitchen doorway into the main room where 6 men sat over cards, and 2 more leaned at the bar, nursing warm beer against the cold. He carried his voice the way he carried his debts, loudly, so that no one would think to look too closely underneath it. "Boys," he said, loud enough to turn heads, "you smell that? That's tonight's supper. Slop fit for Hogs, and she's charging you like it's Sunday ham." A ripple of laughter went through the room, the kind that costs nothing to give and everything to receive. She had come to the doorway with the ladle still in her hand, steam curling off it into the cold air, and she stood there and let the words land on her, the way rain lands on a roof that has already leaked for years. She did not argue. Arguing was a thing for women who still believed the room would side with them. "Half rations tonight," he went on, turning to catch every eye he could. "Half pay to match. Man can't sell what nobody wants to eat." He said it like mercy, like he was doing them all a favor by not throwing the pot out into the street. She set the ladle down inside the pot, slow, so it would not clatter, and give him the satisfaction of her temper. Her hands did not shake. That was the one thing she would not give him. The door behind the room opened on a gust of October wind, and the stranger stepped through it, filling the frame the way a doorway is not meant to be filled, dust pale on his shoulders, the cold riding in with him like something he'd brought on purpose. Nobody at the cards looked up right away. He was the kind of man rooms noticed a half-breath late, after the noticing had already cost them something. He crossed to the bar without a word, boots loud on the boards, and lowered himself onto a stool that groaned under a weight it had not expected. The owner's laughter thinned when he saw the badge pinned crooked to the man's coat, silver gone dull with travel, and he smoothed his collar again, as if that might undo what had just been said, in front of 6 witnesses and a woman with a ladle. "Something hot," the stranger said, not to the owner, but past him, to the doorway where she stood. "Whatever's in the pot." The room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when they sense they have misjudged an audience. She wiped her hands on her apron, picked the ladle back up, and did not look at the owner at all as she turned to fill a bowl for the one man in Hardwick Crossing who had not laughed. A year turned the boards under that same stool smoother, though the stool itself had been replaced twice, and nobody in Hardwick Crossing remembered to be surprised anymore when the Marshal's shoulders filled the doorway on a Tuesday evening in October, the cold riding in with him the same as always, familiar now instead of foreign. The sign above the door had dried hard against its posts through a whole summer of sun, black letters on white board, plain as a promise kept. Nobody laughed when he crossed to the counter this time. Nobody laughed at much of anything in that room these days, not because the laughter had been forbidden, but because it had simply run out of a reason to be cruel. She had the pot going before he'd even swung down from his horse. She always did now. Some sense in her that counted the days of his circuit, the way she once counted flour by the sack. The stable hand, taller than he'd been the autumn before, voice gone deeper, moved behind the counter with the easy confidence of a boy who had stopped flinching at doorways. He set the bowls without being told which ones, wiped the rims with the corner of his apron the way she'd shown him, and did not look to her for permission before ladling the first plate himself. "That one's for the drover by the window," she said, not sharply, just certain, and the boy carried it over without spilling a drop, weaving between tables like he'd been born to the work instead of scared into it. The Marshal watched this the way he watched most things, without comment, though something in the set of his mouth eased a fraction, the way a man's face does when he sees a thing mended that he remembers broken. "He's gotten steady," the Marshal said. "He always was," she answered, wiping her hands on her apron, the same gesture she'd made 100 evenings before this one, though nothing behind it trembled anymore. Just nobody let him prove it. The Marshal didn't answer that directly. He rarely answered anything directly. He set his hat on the counter, the badge on his coat no brighter than it had ever been, dulled permanent now by weather and travel, and he looked at the pot steaming on its hook the way another man might look at a church bell, something that rang the hour whether he was there to hear it or not. She ladled the first bowl for him without asking, because she no longer needed to ask, and set it down with the same economy of motion she used for every customer, though her hand lingered on the counter's edge a half-second longer than it needed to. "Enough for 2?" he asked, the way he always asked, the words worn smooth by a year of repeating, no more weight in them now than the first time, and no less either. "There's always enough now," she said, and turned back to the pot before he could see whatever was in her face when she said it, though the stable hand, refilling a glass 3 feet away, saw it plainly, and said nothing, the way he had learned to say nothing about the things that mattered most. The stable hand had said nothing then either. That was the thing he carried, quieter than the badge's dull shine, quieter than the pot's steam. A year gone, and he still woke some nights turning it over like a coin, with no face on either side. It had been the second week of October, before the Marshal's boots ever crossed the threshold, when the boy had come in past midnight to fetch a lamp oil tin he'd left by the stable door. The saloon had been dark except for the back room, where a single candle burned low and yellow against the window glass, and he had gone to ask if he could take the tin without waking anyone, the way a boy learns to ask permission for things that were never anyone's to forbid. He found Rourke at the ledger, hunched close, pen moving in small deliberate strokes that did not match the easy scrawl of daylight bookkeeping. The ink was darker where he wrote, fresher, laid over older lines the way a man might paint a fence a second time to hide the rot beneath. Rourke's collar was open, his sleeves pushed back, and there was a stillness to him that the boy had never seen in daylight, when he was all vanity and volume, a stillness like a man doing arithmetic he did not want to get wrong twice. The boy stood in the doorway a moment too long. Rourke did not look up. "Boy," he said, not unkindly, not kindly either, "you didn't see nothing worth telling." It was not a question, so the boy did not answer it as one. He took his tin and went back out into the cold, and the frost on the stable door felt like the only honest thing left in the yard. He told himself, walking back with the lamp swinging in his fist, that it was none of his business what a man wrote in his own book. He told himself the same thing 3 nights later, when he saw the same candle burning at the same hour, and again the week after that, until the telling of it became a kind of prayer, he said, to keep from having to act on what he knew. He was 15 and had no people in Hardwick Crossing but the wage Rourke paid him, small and irregular as it was, and a boy with no people learns early that silence is the only coin that never runs short. He watched the woman ladle stew into bowls she was told cost too much to fill, watched Rourke shame her in front of drovers and drifters alike, and some nights the shame of his own quiet sat on him, heavier than any winter the plains had thrown at him. He did not have the ledger. He did not have proof, not the kind a Marshal would want, only a boy's memory of ink laid twice over old numbers, and a fear that outweighed it every single time he might have spoken. So he said nothing, and kept refilling glasses, and waited, without knowing he was waiting, for someone bigger than his own silence to ask him the right question. The Marshal rode in on a gray afternoon in October, under a sky the color of dishwater, and the town noticed him before it wanted to admit it had noticed anything at all. It was the horse first, a rangy bay with the kind of muscle that came from covering ground, not from standing pretty in a livery stall, and then the man on it, broad enough to make the animal look smaller than it was, his hat brim low against a wind that smelled of coming frost, and cattle dust blown down from the rail spur. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. Word moved through Hardwick Crossing the way water moves through a cracked jug, fast and impossible to stop, and by the time he had passed the feed store, the men loafing on its porch had already stopped talking and started watching, the way men watch a storm they cannot outrun. Someone said Marshal, someone else said cattle, a third man, older, spat into the mud and said nothing at all, which in that town was its own kind of confession. The stable hand saw him first among those who worked the saloon, saw him rein up outside the livery, and swing down with the unhurried economy of a man who had ridden further that week than most men rode in a season. He did not ask the boy for water or grain right away. He stood a moment with one hand on the bay's neck, looking down the length of the street at the saloon's crooked sign, at the mud-rutted road, at the huddle of men who had gone quiet at his coming, and something in the stillness of him made the boy's chest go tight in a way he could not have named. The town's wariness was not fear exactly. It was the wariness of men who had all, in some small way, made their peace with looking past what they should not have looked past. The missing tally on a delivery, the shortfall blamed on a woman's wastefulness, the debts nobody spoke of upriver, and who understood, without being told, that a federal marshal riding a circuit for cattle thieves might not stop his looking at cattle. Doors that had stood open all week found reasons to be shut. Men who had leaned easy against the rail found reasons to walk elsewhere. Even Rourke, watching from the saloon window with a rag still in his hand, went the color of old tallow and set the rag down very slowly, as though sudden movement might draw an eye already too sharp for comfort. The Marshal asked the boy only one question, where a man might get a hot meal in this town, and the boy, throat dry, pointed toward the saloon's back door without a word, the way he pointed at everything he was too afraid to name outright. The saloon door hung crooked on its hinge, and it groaned when he pushed through it, a sound like something old complaining about being disturbed. Inside, the lamp oil burned low and yellow, and the air held that particular thickness of a room that had been closed against the cold too long. Tobacco smoke gone stale, spilled beer gone sour, and beneath it, faint but persistent, the smell of something simmering that did not belong to either. He did not look at the men who stopped talking when he entered. He did not look at the bar, where a lean man in a clean vest straightened, as though preparing to perform some greeting he had rehearsed. He crossed the room the way a man crosses ground he has already decided is unimportant, and he sat at the counter nearest the kitchen door, where the heat came through in waves. Someone at a corner table murmured about the cook, her portions thin, her meat old, a woman who could not be trusted with a household budget, let alone a business ledger. The words were not quiet enough to be private, and not loud enough to be a challenge, the particular pitch men used when they wanted a stranger to hear something without having said it to his face. He gave no sign of hearing it. He set his hat on the counter, crown down, the way a man does who intends to stay. She came through the door already knowing there was a stranger seated, because the boy had run ahead to tell her, breathless, that a lawman wanted feeding. Her hands were still floured from the biscuits she had not finished. She wiped them once on her apron, lifted the ladle from where it rested against the pot's iron lip, and did not ask what he wanted. There was only the one thing to want tonight, and she gave it to him without ceremony, a full plate, steam rising off it in a column that caught the lamplight and hung there a moment before dissolving into the room's gray air. She set it in front of him without speaking, the way a woman sets down something she has stopped expecting anyone to want. He looked at the plate before he looked at her. The stew was dark with barley and thick beef, glistening where the fat had rendered, a crust of pepper along the rim where the ladle had dragged. He picked up the spoon slowly, as if considering the shape of it, and the room seemed to lean in without moving, the way a room does when everyone in it is pretending not to watch. The first bite he took without a word. He did not nod, he did not frown. His jaw worked once, twice, and something in his shoulders, some tautness that had ridden with him all the way from the rail spur, eased by a degree too small for most men to notice. She noticed. She had learned, over years of feeding hard men in a hard place, to read a mouth before it spoke, and what she saw in his told her nothing she could yet name, only that he was not finished, and that he had not once looked toward the man behind the bar. He finished the first plate the way a man finishes a debt he did not know he owed. He set the spoon down across the rim, precise, and looked up, and for a moment she thought that was the whole of it. One plate, a polite emptying, the kind men did when they wanted to leave a place feeling they had not wasted anyone's time. Then he pushed the plate 2 inches toward her and said the only words he had spoken since he sat again. She refilled it herself. She did not call for the boy who usually ran plates, did not trust her hands to anyone else's carrying of them. The ladle scraped the bottom of the pot and came up heavy, and she set the second plate down with the same silence as the first, and he ate that one faster, the way hunger admits itself once it has been given permission. Behind the bar, the saloon owner had stopped polishing the same glass he had been polishing for the better part of 10 minutes. He watched with the particular stillness of a man doing arithmetic he did not want to finish. Twice he opened his mouth as though he might say something about the marshal's appetite, some joke to reclaim the room, and twice he closed it again, because there was nothing in the marshal's face that invited a joke. The men at the near tables who had laughed loudest an hour before had gone quiet in the way men go quiet when they sense the ground shifting under a floor they had thought was solid. The third plate went slower. He ate it the way a man eats when he is no longer proving anything to his stomach and has started, instead, to notice what is in front of him, the barley soft at the edges and firm at the center, the beef that had been browned before it was ever wet, the pepper laid on, with a hand that measured by feel rather than habit. He did not say any of this. He never would, not in words she could carry with her afterward and repeat to herself on the hard nights. But he cleaned the plate down to the iron, and when he set the spoon across it a third time, the sound it made was very small and very final, and it was louder in that room than anything the owner had said about her cooking in 14 months. Nobody laughed, nobody scraped a boot or muttered pig slop under their breath, the way they had grown used to doing when the owner wanted the room laughing with him. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight, the particular weight of men recalculating a woman they had decided, without ever tasting her, that they already understood. The marshal wiped his mouth once with the back of his hand, stood, and turned finally, not to her, not yet, but toward the man behind the bar, and said, "I'd like a word. Private." Rourke's face did the thing it always did when the ground shifted under him without his permission, a small tightening around the eyes, quickly smoothed, the practiced calm of a man who had learned to look unbothered long before he had learned to actually be unbothered. He set down the rag he'd been running over a glass that was already clean, and said something about the back room being cold this time of year, something about there being better light out front, small words meant to buy a few seconds to think. The marshal did not answer any of it. He simply held the door open with one broad hand and waited, the way a man waits for weather to pass rather than argues with it. She watched them go. The room did not empty out behind them. Nobody had anywhere better to be on a night that cold. But the talk thinned to almost nothing, men leaning toward each other without quite looking at each other, the way people do when they want to hear a door but pretend they don't. The door shut. She could not make out words through it, only the register of voices, the marshal's low and even, never rising, and Rourke's climbing once, twice, then dropping back down like a man remembering himself. She stood at the stove with the ladle still in her hand and did not stir anything, because there was nothing left in the pot worth stirring, and because her arm had gone strange and light, the way it did sometimes, after carrying something heavy for too long, and then setting it down. The stable hand was near the woodpile by the back window, close enough that if the panes had been thinner, he might have caught a phrase or two, and she saw him go very still, the particular stillness of a boy who has learned that being noticed near trouble is its own kind of trouble. He did not come inside. He did not look at her either, though she felt him not looking, which was its own kind of looking. 15 minutes, perhaps 20, long enough that the fire in the front room burned down and someone fed it without being asked, long enough that two men gave up waiting and paid for their whiskey and left into the cold, boots crunching off toward the dark. She wiped the counter that did not need wiping. She checked the pot that did not need checking. She did not let herself imagine what was being said, because she had learned, in 14 months of being talked about instead of talked to, that imagining only cost her sleep she couldn't spare. When the door finally opened, Rourke came out first, and his face had gone the color of old tallow, and he did not look at her at all, not even the sideways contempt he usually spared her. The marshal came out behind him, unhurried, settling his hat, and he looked at her exactly once. Not long, not soft, just a look that told her nothing, except that something had been decided, and that she would not be told what it was tonight. A year does something to a kitchen that no amount of scrubbing can undo on its own. It settles into the walls, the way wood smoke settles into wool, until the place smells less like commerce and more like a life being lived in it. She stood now at the same iron stove, though the stove itself had been replaced twice, and watched the stable hand's hands shake as he cut the barley too fine. "Not like that," she said. "You want it to hold its shape when it swells. Cut it fine and it turns to paste." He looked up at her the way he still sometimes did, like a boy waiting to be told he'd ruined something. He was not a boy anymore, not really. A year had put muscle in his shoulders and a few inches on his height, but some habits of fear took longer to leave a person than others. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and cut it thicker. She watched him work for a while without speaking, the way her mother had once watched her, the way she supposed someone had watched her mother. There was a rhythm to teaching that had nothing to do with words. It was in the wrist, in the weight of the spoon, in knowing when to let a pot alone and when to stir. She had never written the recipe down. She did not intend to start now. Some things were meant to travel through hands, not paper. "You'll do the noon service alone tomorrow," she said. "I've business at the notary's." His knife stopped. "Alone. You've watched me a year. You know the weight of the salt by now, better than most men know their own name." She untied her apron partway, testing the knot, retying it. "I'm not leaving you the whole of it, just the noon." He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the pot, her mother's pot, black and dented, and hung now on its hook behind the counter, where anyone could see it, where once it had sat hidden and shamed in a back room, while a man called its contents slop. She saw him looking, and said nothing about it, because there was nothing to say that the pot itself didn't already say better. "I remember," he said finally, not looking up from the barley, "when I couldn't tell anybody what I saw in that ledger. I was afraid of what he'd do. I know. I should have said something sooner. You said it when it mattered." She took the knife from his hand, checked the cut, gave it back. That's the only timing that counts, in the end. Outside, wagon wheels ground against the frozen rut of the road, and somewhere down the counter, a man asked if there was coffee yet, and the ordinary noise of the place folded back over them the way it always did, burying the old debt beneath the everyday one, the debt of teaching, of being taught, of a boy who had once been too frightened to speak and now stood cutting barley in a kitchen that bore her name. But behind her, in memory, a door was still open on a cold October night, and a man with tallow-colored skin was still walking out of a back room, having said nothing yet about what had been decided inside it. The door had shut that October night, and for 3 days after, nothing seemed to happen at all. The Marshal did not eat lunch at the counter. He did not eat supper either. He took a room above the harness shop and was seen, when he was seen, walking toward the rail depot with a ledger book tucked under one arm, not the saloon's ledger, not yet, but his own, thin and black, the kind a man carried when he intended to make a record no one could later dispute. On the 4th day, he asked to see the saloon's books. The lean man produced them with a flourish that did not match the tightness around his mouth, laid the columns open on the bar as though he had nothing in the world to hide, and stood close while the Marshal turned the pages, too close, the way a man stands when he wants to watch another man's eyes rather than his hands. The Marshal did not hurry. He read each entry the way he ate, deliberate, unbothered by the silence he left hanging. Twice he asked for a lamp brought closer. Once he asked for nothing at all, only sat with his thumb pressed against a column of figures for the better part of a minute, as if the ink itself might confess if given time enough. He spoke to the supply drivers next, one by one, out by the wagons where the cold kept conversations short and honest. He asked about deliveries in June. He asked about deliveries in September. He asked whether a man remembered signing for 4 sacks of barley or only 3, and whether he'd been paid the difference in coin or told to forget it. The stable boy watched all of this from the shadow of the loading dock, currying a horse that did not need currying, and said nothing, because saying nothing was the only thing he knew how to do well where the lean man was concerned. By the 7th day, the Marshal had a receipt in his coat pocket that did not match the ledger's claim, and by the 9th he had 2 more. By the 11th he had ink. Not figuratively, ink, plain and damning, 2 different bottles worth in a single column of numbers that were supposed to have been written in one sitting by one hand. He held the page to the window, where the light was clean and cold, and he studied the way the darker ink sat slightly raised above the older, faded strokes beneath it, the way a lie sits on top of a truth it was never quite able to erase. She did not know any of this while it was happening. She only knew the Marshal came for supper each of those 11 nights, ate without ceremony, said less than usual, and once, only once, looked at her over the rim of his cup with something that was not quite an apology, and not quite a promise, the way a man looks when he is carrying a weight he isn't ready to set down yet. "Enough for 2 tonight," he said, the same as always. And she filled the bowl, not knowing that behind it, in a drawer above the harness shop, the truth was already written down in someone else's hand. Rourke came to her that same night, after the Marshal's boots had cleared the porch steps, and the cold had swallowed the sound of his horse. He came the way a man comes when he has been rehearsing something in a mirror, and has not convinced even himself. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen with his hat in his hands, turning it, and for a moment, he looked less like the man who owned the place, and more like a boy waiting to be scolded. He said the season was slow. He said the Marshal's business would pass, as such business always did, and that when it passed, there would be less need for a full kitchen, less need for a woman who cooked for 40, when 20 came through the door most nights, now that the herds had thinned. He said it might be a mercy, really, to leave before the leaving was made for her. He offered $11. He called it generous. She did not answer right away. She set down the ladle she had been scrubbing and looked at him the way she looked at meat to see if it had turned, and something in that look made him talk faster, the words tumbling loose from him, like grain from a torn sack. He said the town had opinions about a woman alone running a man's kitchen. He said opinions mattered more than she understood, that a saloon's name was worth something and hers, forgive him, was not the name people wanted on it. He said all of this while not once meeting her eyes, and she noticed that his hands, usually so still and sure when he counted coin across the bar, would not stop moving. "You've never once asked me to leave before the marshal came," she said. He said that wasn't true. He said he'd thought it plenty. "Thinking and asking are different animals," she said, and went back to her scrubbing, and he stood there a moment longer, with the offer still hanging between them like smoke that hadn't decided where to settle, and then he set the $11 on the flour barrel, careful, like a man leaving payment for something he wasn't proud to have taken, and walked out into the yard, where his own breath went white and thin above him. She did not touch the money that night. She left it on the barrel through supper and through the washing after, and only near midnight, when the fire had gone to coals and the house had gone quiet, did she pick it up and hold it to the lamp, turning it over the way the marshal had turned his pages, looking for what exactly it was that a man paid for, when the thing he feared most wasn't losing money at all, but being seen. 11 days into the reckoning, the marshal found the stable hand alone with the horses, forking hay into the trough with the particular carefulness of a boy trying to look busy enough not to be spoken to. Frost had come early that week, silvering the fence rails, and the boy's breath came out of him in short white bursts as he worked. The marshal did not announce himself. He leaned against the stall post the way he leaned against most things, unhurried, as though he had all the season to spend on one conversation, and watched the boy work until the boy could no longer pretend not to notice him. "You sleep in the loft," the marshal said. Not a question. The boy said he did. "Loft's got a window, looks down into the back room." The boy's fork stopped moving. He said the window was small. He said a man couldn't see much through a window that small. "Didn't ask what a man could see," the marshal said. "Asked what you did." The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that presses on a boy's chest until he either speaks or chokes. The horses shifted in their stalls. Somewhere behind the saloon, a door banged in the wind and did not open again. The boy said he'd seen the owner at the ledger some nights, after the last drinker had gone, and the lamps were down to one. He said the owner wrote in it twice sometimes, once with the black ink kept in the drawer, and once with a different pot he brought from his own room, and that the second writing always came after, quiet, like a man correcting his own arithmetic. "Show me which pages," the marshal said. The boy said he couldn't read the numbers well enough to know which pages. He said he'd only ever watched the hands, not the words, because watching the words felt like a thing that could get a boy fired, or worse. "Watching's not a crime," the marshal said. "Only the doing is." He asked why the boy hadn't said anything before now, and the boy's jaw worked for a moment before the answer came, small and plain. Because the owner paid him. Because the owner could stop paying him. Because a boy with no family within 40 miles could not afford to be the one who spoke first. He said it the way a man says something he has carried a long time and is grateful, finally, to set down. The marshal nodded once, slow, and did not press further. He took out his notebook and wrote 3 lines by the gray light coming through the loft window, then closed it and put it away inside his coat. "You did right, telling me," he said. The boy said he hoped so. "Hope's got nothing to do with it," the marshal said. "It's true. That's enough." He walked back toward the saloon, with the frost cracking faint under his boots, and behind him, the boy stood a long while in the cold barn, forking no more hay, feeling the strange lightness of a thing finally let go of. The ledger waited for him on the backroom table where he had left it, its cover soft with handling, the ink inside gone through more moods than a single bookkeeper should have shown in 14 months. He sat with it under the lamp and read it the way a man reads a river he intends to cross, not for its beauty, but for where it would drown him if he misjudged a step. The pattern held now, plain as a brand on a hide. Entries in one hand, black and even, recording the true weight of flour and beef and barley that came off the supply wagons. Entries in another hand, paler, hurried, crossed out and rewritten above them, smaller numbers, shortages, a note in the margin, blaming spoilage, blaming waste, blaming a woman's careless hand at the stove. He laid the driver's receipt beside the ledger and matched the dates. Where the receipt said 300 pounds delivered, the ledger said 200, and the missing 100 had been priced, quietly, against her wages for the following week. He did this 11 times, once for each month he could account for, and each time the number came out close enough to the same figure that a man could set his watch by it. He wrote the sum at the bottom of a blank page and looked at it for a while before he underlined it. $340. Not a round number invented to frighten a debtor, but the kind of number that came from an actual account somewhere upriver, kept by men who did not forgive it in interest and did not care whose name got dragged through the mud to cover it. He thought of the cattle barons he had dealt with before, in other towns along the spur, men who lent money the way other men set traps, patient, indifferent to what got caught in them, only interested that something did. A saloon owner behind on such a debt would look for the nearest soft place to press the loss into, and a widowed cook with no family to speak for her, and a reputation already primed by public scorn, was as soft a place as a man like that could ask for. It was not cruelty exactly. It was arithmetic, dressed up as judgment, the oldest trick on any frontier. Call the debt someone else's fault, and let the town's contempt do the rest of the collecting for you. He closed the ledger and sat a moment with his hand flat on its cover, as if to keep the numbers from slipping back into disorder now that he had finally forced them into a line. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the far bawl of cattle penned for the night. He thought of her standing over that pot, feeding a room full of men who ate her food, and believed the worst of her in the same breath, and he found that he no longer needed to wonder why she had never defended herself louder. A woman arguing against a ledger she could not read was no match for a man who controlled what the numbers said. He rose, pocketed the ledger, and went to find the notary. The counter had not always been smooth. She remembered when it was raw pine, splintered at the edge where men set their glasses down too hard. And she remembered sanding it herself one slow Sunday because no one else had thought to. A year of hands had done what her own sanding could not. Elbows leaned in conversation, palms pressed flat while men counted coins, the drag of a rag across it every night before the lamps went out. Now, in the low gold light of an autumn afternoon, she ran her hand along the grain and felt every hour of that year folded into the wood like something you could almost read with your fingers if you closed your eyes. There had been a week, not long after the humiliation reached its worst, when she had packed the small trunk that still sat under her cot. She had folded her 2 good dresses and the shawl her mother left her, and she had stood with her hand on the lid for the better part of an hour, listening to the wind worry at the shutters, telling herself that a woman with nothing owed no one an explanation for leaving quietly. She had gotten as far as the road once, in the gray hour before dawn, the pot too heavy to carry and too dear to leave, and she had stood there, with her breath fogging in front of her, weighing which kind of loss she could live with. She had turned back before the sun came up. She never told anyone that. Not the stable hand, not the notary, not even the marshal, though she suspected he knew. He seemed, even then, like a man who noticed things people tried to hide in plain sight. She thought of it now with a strange, distant tenderness, the way a person thinks of a fever they survived. It did not frighten her anymore. It simply sat there, a fact among other facts. One more thing that had almost happened in a town that specialized in almost happenings. Almost losing the roof before the rains came. Almost losing the herd to the bad winter. Almost losing her name to a man who had never once cooked a meal in his life, but had decided, with the ease of someone balancing someone else's debt, that her name was the cheapest thing in the room to spend. She wiped the counter, though it did not need wiping. It was a habit now, the way praying might be for another woman, a small ritual to keep her hands busy while her mind wandered somewhere it did not often let itself go. Behind her, the pot hung dark and polished, catching the light in a slow, patient gleam, and she found herself listening, without quite meaning to, for the sound of a horse she had learned, over the better part of a year, to recognize before she could see it. The horse did not come that day. What came instead, folding backward through her memory as the counter gleamed under her cloth, was midday in October, 11 days after the Marshal's first silent supper, when the saloon had been fullest, drovers in for their pay, the notary's clerk stopping through for a whiskey, the mayor's cousin leaning against the doorframe with nothing better to do than watch other people's business unfold. The Marshal had walked in without hurry. That was the thing she remembered most. no hurry in him, the way a man walks who has already decided how a room will end before he enters it. He had set the ledger on the counter first, then the driver's receipt beside it, squaring their corners like a man laying out cards he did not need to bluff with. Rourke had been mid-laugh at something, wiping a glass, and the laugh had died somewhere between his throat and his teeth when he saw what lay in front of him. "You want to explain this entry?" the marshal had said, not a question. Dated the 9th of September. Says 40 pounds of flour delivered. Driver's receipt says 50. He had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. The room had gone quiet, in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when they sense they are about to witness something they will talk about for years. Rourke's mouth had opened, closed. A man makes mistakes in a ledger. A man makes one mistake. The marshal had turned a page. "This is the 11th I found. Always short on paper, always blamed on her pot." He had not looked at Bess when he said it, but everyone else had, and she had stood very still behind the counter with a spoon in her hand, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, like a hand pressed flat against her back. "She's a wasteful cook," Rourke had said, too fast, too loud, the words scrambling out ahead of his thinking. "Ask anyone. Ask the men who've eaten her slop." "I ate it," the marshal had said. 3 plates. Nothing wasted. He had let that sit a moment, the way he let most things sit, and then he had tapped the ledger once with 2 fingers. "Ink's different here. Newer. You went back and changed the sums after the fact." He had looked up then, and his voice had not changed at all, which was somehow worse than if it had. 14 months of it by my count. Dead upriver don't pay itself, does it? The mayor's cousin had straightened off the doorframe. The clerk had stopped mid-sip, and Rourke, lean and vain and suddenly very small in the middle of his own saloon, had looked at the ledger and the receipt and the whole silent room, and found that for the first time in 14 months, there was no number he could write his way out of. Rourke's collar had gone dark with sweat, a spreading stain that crept from beneath his string tie down into the fabric, and he kept touching it, as though he could will it dry again. He laughed once. It came out wrong, cracked in the middle like a dropped plate. "Now hold on," he said. "Hold on now. A man keeps 2 sets of figures sometimes. That's just business, that's not." The marshal said nothing. He had a way of not saying nothing that pressed harder than words. Rourke's eyes went to the door, to the mayor's cousin standing there with his arms crossed, to the clerk, who had gone very still with his cup halfway to his mouth, and something in his face shifted, not defiance breaking, but a man watching the last door in a room he'd built himself swing shut. His hand found the edge of the ledger and gripped it, knuckles whitening, as if he could hold the numbers still by force. "They've been after me since spring," he said, and his voice had dropped, gone thin. "The men upriver. You don't know what they do to a man who's short." He looked up, and for one moment there was nothing performed in his face at all, just a tired, frightened man who had built a small kingdom out of borrowed time and watched it come due. "I never meant for her to carry it. It was easier than owning it myself. That's all. That's the whole of it." It was the truest thing he had said in 14 months, and it did him no good at all. The marshal closed the ledger with 2 fingers, slow, the way another man might close a coffin. "You'll sign the paper," he said. "Notary's already sent for. Or I take you to the rail spur myself and let the men upriver settle it their own way." Rourke's mouth opened, closed. He looked toward the door again, toward the front room where the stew still sat cooling in its pot, where she still stood with a spoon in her hand, not knowing yet what had been decided in the room behind her. Something passed over his face that might have been shame, might have only been fear of shame, and he sat down hard in the chair, as though his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him. "Get the notary," he said, to no one, to the floor. "Get him now, before I think better of it." The notary arrived within the hour, a narrow man with ink-stained cuffs, who kept an office above the feed store, and had, until that afternoon, expected nothing more eventful from the day than a dispute over a grazing fence. He set his case on the same table where the ledger had lain, unfolded a blank sheet, and asked, in the flat voice of a man who had drafted 100 such documents and cared for none of them personally, what the terms were to be. The marshal told him, plainly, without flourish, the way he did everything. The saloon known as the Cross Timber, its building, its stock, its fixtures and furnishings, transferred in full to the woman who had cooked in its kitchen for 6 years, as partial restitution for 14 months of falsified losses, totaling $340 owed and never paid. The notary wrote it in his careful hand, dated it the 11th day of the investigation, October the 29th, 1872, and read it back twice before he would let anyone sign it. The saloon owner signed first. His hand shook enough that the ink blotted at the end of his name, a small dark star that would sit there permanently once the paper dried, and he did not look up from the page as he did it. Then they called her in. She came from the front room, still holding the ladle, not knowing what she had been summoned for, and when the notary explained the document in the dry language such documents are always explained in, she did not move for a long moment. She looked at the paper. She looked at the man behind the desk, smaller now than she had ever seen him, and then at the marshal, who said nothing, who only nodded once toward the pen. Her hand did not shake when she signed. She wrote her name the way she had learned it as a girl, full and unhurried, Elizabeth Calloway, and set the pen down as though she had done nothing more remarkable than close a jar. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first true cold of the season down from the north, and somewhere past the window, a wagon creaked over the ruts toward the rail spur, indifferent to what had just been settled in that back room. The notary blotted the page, folded it twice, and told her where the county clerk's office was, should she ever need the copy. She did not answer right away. She was still looking at her own name on the paper, as if she expected the ink to change its mind. The eastbound stage came through Hardwick Crossing at noon on Thursdays, same as it always had, and it did not know or care that the man boarding it that particular Thursday had once stood behind a bar and called a widow's stew slop fit for hogs. The driver was the same one who had hauled flour and salt pork out to the saloon for a year and more, the same man whose delivery receipts now sat folded inside a Marshal's saddlebag as proof of everything Rourke had denied. He did not look at his former passenger with any particular malice. He simply took the fare, the way he took every fare, and glanced once at the trunk being loaded, smaller than a man might expect, for someone who had run a business for 6 years, before climbing up to the box. She watched from the boardwalk across the street, not because she wished to see him go, but because the whole town had gathered there, the way towns gather for hangings and weddings, and anything else that promises to end the way it should. Rourke did not look at the crowd. He kept his eyes on the middle distance the way a man does when he has decided that looking at nothing is easier than looking at faces he recognizes. His coat was buttoned wrong at the collar. Nobody told him. The stable hand stood near the trough, arms crossed, watching with the particular stillness of someone who had spent 11 days afraid and was only now learning what to do with the fear once its cause was gone. He did not wave, he did not smile, he only watched the trunk go up, watched the door shut, and let out a breath long enough that it seemed to have been held since October. The driver called out to the team. The wheels found the same ruts that had carried sacks of barley and crates of salt pork toward the saloon for over a year, the same ruts Rourke had once stood beside, telling a delivery man that nothing had come, that the widow inside had wasted what never existed. The stage pulled east, toward the rail line, toward whatever debts and towns waited for a man who had run out of both. She did not watch it out of sight. She turned back toward the saloon instead, toward the door with its scarred hinges and the smell of wood smoke drifting out from the kitchen, and found that her hands, for the first time in 14 months, had nothing to defend. She paid the sign painter with 4 days' worth of egg money and a promise of supper, and he came out from Ellsworth with a plank of pine already sanded smooth, waiting only for the words. She told him what she wanted plain, no flourish, no gilt edging like the old saloon sign had worn before the wind took half its paint, just the name. He asked if she wanted anything else beneath it, a stew pot maybe, or a wheat sheaf, the kind of decoration merchants favored. She said no, just the name would do. Let the food speak for the rest. It took him 2 days to letter it right, and she watched from the kitchen window each morning while the coffee boiled, watching the black paint go on, stroke by stroke, until the thing above the door read, Calloway's. in letters tall enough to see from the depot platform. The town did not change its mind all at once. Trust never did, not out here, not for a woman who had spent 14 months hearing herself called wasteful in front of strangers. Some of the old regulars still ordered careful, still counted their change twice, as if expecting the till to cheat them the way it once had under different hands. She did not argue with their caution, she only kept ladling, kept the pot full, kept the fire going long after the last plate was cleared, because that was the only argument she trusted to hold. Winter came hard that year, colder than the one before it, and still she opened before dawn, breaking ice off the water barrel with the flat of an axe, before the first drover ever knocked. Word moved slow across a cattle town, slower than gossip, because good cooking did not travel on anyone's tongue the way scandal had. It had to be tasted, table by table, spoon by spoon, until enough men had eaten enough plates to say plainly that the widow's stew had never been slop, not once, not ever. By March, the stable hand was drawing a small wage for splitting wood and hauling water, no longer flinching when the door opened too fast. By June, she had hired a second girl to wash dishes so her own hands could stay on the ladle where they belonged. And through every one of those months, whenever the Marshal's circuit brought him back through Hardwick Crossing, he came first through that door beneath the new sign, hat in hand, and asked the same 4 words he had asked in October, as if nothing about the town or the sign or the year between them had changed at all. He never announced himself. He simply arrived, the way weather arrived, and the town had learned to read the particular hour of his coming the same way they read a change in wind, a shift in the dust past the livery, the creak of a saddle settling, the sound of a man dismounting who had ridden long enough that his knees no longer complained about it. He tied the same gray gelding to the same post each time, though the post itself had been replaced twice since the fire scare in April, and he never once tied it anywhere else, as if the ground itself had become a kind of appointment. He came 4 times that year on his circuit, and each time he did small things that cost him nothing to explain and everything to notice. He fixed the hinge on the storeroom door without being asked, the one that had complained since the pot had first come off the wagon 11 months before. He carried the flour sacks in from the wagon bed himself, refusing the stable hand's help with a look rather than a word, because the boy's shoulder had not fully healed from a fall the winter prior, and the Marshal had simply decided, without saying so, that some weight was not his to carry yet. He mended a bench leg with a nail he produced from his own coat pocket, as though he had ridden 30 miles anticipating that particular splinter of need. And always, before any of it, before the hat came off, or the boots were even properly wiped on the mat inside the door, he asked, "Enough for 2?" She had stopped answering it as a question sometime in February. By June, it was closer to a greeting between 2 people who already knew the shape of the other's day. She would tip her head toward the pot without looking up from the ladle, and he would take the same stool at the end of the counter, the one that did not wobble, the one she had started keeping clear on the mornings she expected him, though she never let herself say that out loud, not even to the second girl who washed the dishes and noticed everything and said nothing, the way good help learns to. The town noticed too, eventually. Towns always did, but by then there was nothing left to gossip about that hadn't already been settled, plainly, publicly, over a ledger and a signature, a year before. The October evening came on early, the way it did that far into the season, the sky bruising purple over the rail spur before the last supper crowd had cleared their plates. He came in later than usual that week, his horse blown from a hard ride out past the county line, and he did not ask if there was enough for 2. He simply sat and waited and watched her ladle the stew into 2 bowls instead of setting his down alone at the far stool. She noticed the silence in it. She always noticed silences, the way she had once learned to read a man's temper by the set of his shoulders before he ever opened his mouth. This silence was different. It had weight, but no threat in it. He ate slowly that night, slower than the first time, 13 months gone now since he'd cleaned 3 plates without a word, and asked to see a man who did not deserve the asking. When he finally set the spoon down, he did not wipe his mouth right away. "The circuit's shifting," he said. "Come spring, they want me stationed." not riding it anymore, settled somewhere along the line. She did not stop scraping the pot. Settled where? Wherever I choose to be settled. He turned the bowl a quarter turn on the counter, an old habit, aligning things that did not need aligning. Thought I'd ask you where that might be, before I put in the paperwork. She set down the ladle. Behind her, the sign with her name on it caught the last of the window light, the paint gone matte with a year of wood smoke and steam. She had commissioned it herself, letter by letter, and she had never once regretted the cost of it. "You've been asking me the same question a year now," she said. "Every Tuesday, enough for two?" "That's a different question." "No," she said, "it isn't. It's the same one asked plainer." She wiped her hands on her apron, unhurried, the way she did everything that mattered. "There's a room off the back that isn't used for anything but flour sacks. Roof's sound. Stove draws well enough if you clean the flue twice a season." She looked at him directly, the way she had learned to look at men who mistook softness for weakness. "That's not sentiment. That's an answer." He almost smiled. It was a small thing, the corner of his mouth moving half an inch, but she had learned to read that too, same as she'd learned to read everything else worth reading in this town. "Then I'll clean the flue myself," he said, and reached for the ladle before she could stop him, filling his own bowl a second time. The pot hung behind her, catching what light came through the west window, black iron gone soft and dark with polish, the same vessel that had once been called fit only for hogs. She had scrubbed it that morning the way she scrubbed it every morning, out of habit more than need, because a thing that had carried her through a year like that one deserved hands on it every day, whether it was dirty or not. She thought about the sign outside, the letters she'd chosen herself, the paint she'd paid for out of the first month's honest profit. A name on a board. She had wanted it fierce, as anything she'd ever wanted, back when wanting it felt like defiance. Now it hung there plain as a fact, and she understood, standing in the steam of her own kitchen, that the sign had never been the thing that mattered. The sign was only wood. What mattered was smaller than that, and it happened every week, and it never announced itself. A name could be painted by anyone with a brush, and enough spite or enough money. A promise kept, week after week, through mud season and drought and the long gray stretch of winter. That was harder to counterfeit. That was the ledger nobody falsified, because nobody thought to look at it, because it was written in nothing but returning. She heard boots on the porch before she heard the door, the particular weight of them, unhurried, familiar as her own pulse. She did not turn right away. She stirred the pot instead, let the smell rise, beef and barley, and the bay leaf she'd started adding that spring, and she let him stand there a moment in the doorway the way he always did, taking the room in like a man confirming the world had held its shape since he'd last seen it. "Enough for two?" he asked. She set down the ladle and looked at him, and at the stable hand sweeping near the stairs who no longer flinched at the sound of the door, and at the counter with her name on it, catching the last of the afternoon. "There's always enough now," she said. He hung his hat on the peg that had become his peg, without either of them naming it so, and he sat where he always sat, and she filled the bowl the way she always filled it, generous, unhesitating, a woman who had learned long ago that the only apology owed was to herself, and she had already given it. Outside, the wind moved through Hardwick Crossing the way it always had, indifferent to towns and names and debts settled. Inside, the stew steamed on, and neither of them said anything more, because nothing more needed saying.